oranges. And the temperatures are dropping, thank God, although maybe they're dropping a little more rapidly than some of us like. We're also still in a change in this church. And so you shouldn't feel ashamed or surprised if our new life together still feels a little bit funny to you even after a few months. Everybody responds to change a little bit differently, and we all move through changing seasons at our own pace. But new seasons are a good time to take stock of things. The things we own, the lives we keep. And it's a good opportunity to welcome this experience to learn from the changes taking place. After all, most changes we can't really control, and what else are we going to do? At our church, we're taking stock of a lot of things. Our mission statement, our goals, our outreach to the community. We're looking at our committees and how they function. We're looking at our calendars and thinking about how we might be best present to the world around us while also retaining our own sanity. And in worship, we're being called to look at the needs of the people that we encounter every day and think about how we as a church might better share the love of Jesus Christ with them. And maybe we're even looking at our own hearts, asking ourselves the question, where do I still need more of God's transformation or grace or renewal? So it's only natural that as we take inventory of all these things, that we also have to look at the importance of stewardship in our lives. Now, talking about money in the church is tricky. For many of us, the choices that we make with our finances feels very personal. And it is. The church hasn't always done very good at talking about money, at least not in a productive way. People often walk away from church conversations about money feeling either swindled or guilt-ridden. Why am I always being asked to give more? I give plenty. Or maybe your inner monologue goes a little more like, I give if I could, but I'm barely getting by. When churches talk about money, it's usually very black and white, cut and dry. We usually boil it down to this one rule: give 10%. And for some of us sitting here, that's already a well-established spiritual discipline. And for others of us, we struggle year after year after year to maintain it. And so hearing that rule again isn't very helpful. Because of that, so many people don't give. And many churches avoid conversations about finance at all. But can I confess that I'm not sure avoiding the conversation is probably not the answer either. We know that money has a tremendous impact and influence on our lives. It is the grease that keeps the axle turning, so to speak, but it's often more than that. Money is a source of power. Money gives us a certain amount of influence. Money gives us a sense of security that we all crave. It can elevate our self-image. It gives weight to our opinions. And it plays on our deepest fears and our greatest desires. Jesus took countless opportunities to talk about money with his disciples in ministry. And it wasn't because he was trying to get something out of them. Jesus knew that money isn't just the thing that keeps the world turning. It's also the thing that'll knock it right off its axis. potential to wreak havoc in our spiritual lives. It has the potential to affect the world for good and for ill. And so over the next 4 weeks, we're going to bravely and courageously talk a little bit about stewardship, especially as it pertains to how we think about and use money. And if that makes you uncomfortable, then you should know that you're in very good company, because it makes me uncomfortable too. Pastors are just as uncomfortable talking about money as you are uncomfortable sitting there and listening to us talk about it. As I was reading about how we can approach this conversation of money together, I was pleased to see that our founding father, John Wesley, actually took the opportunity to talk about money a lot in his sermons because of the changing culture that he was living in. Wesley was by no means against having money. In fact, the personal spiritual disciplines that Wesley taught his people enabled those who were in lower class to become more responsible, to become better educated, and to accrue more wealth. But as the Methodist people began to accrue this wealth and use it in ways not unlike maybe some of the frivolous examples we see money being used for in our culture, Wesley realized that he had to talk to his people about money, because the world certainly would. Wesley had this saying that we saw in our video that we're going to study in depth over the next few weeks together. He says, having first earned all you can, and second, having saved all you can, then give all you can. Earn, save, give. 3 simple rules for money. But before we get into these rules, we need to take a step back, and we need to seek wisdom. To approach new seasons of life, or controversial topics like these, we need to exercise wisdom. And I don't mean by wisdom simply following the world's wisdom about best practices for using our money, although that is important. As followers of Christ, the issue is deeper than simply getting some sound financial advice. Because Scripture teaches us that how we manage what we've been given goes straight to the heart of our relationship with God and with one another. Our text for this morning, in it we meet Solomon, and he's having a dream, and we meet him at a moment in his life where he's probably experiencing the biggest change he's ever had. A young boy with no leadership experience, Solomon has just been made the successor to his father's royal throne. And he's become king of the Israelite people. As if that isn't enough, God comes to Solomon in his dream and basically gives him free rein to make his first wish as king. God lets Solomon ask for whatever he wants. Now, Solomon, a young man, has every resource at his disposal: riches, political authority, military power, influence over an entire country. And it's just been given to him. And if you doubt how powerful this guy really was, just read the rest of chapter 3 and how he settles a dispute between 2 of the women in his kingdom. Solomon could have asked for anything. He could have asked that the enemies of his father be delivered to his feet. He could have asked for a longer life than David had lived, more power, more land, more wealth. But he didn't. Instead, Solomon asked for wisdom. "O Lord, my God, your servant finds himself in the midst of the people you have chosen, a people too numerous to be numbered or counted. Grant then your servant an understanding mind to judge your people, to distinguish between the good and the bad. For who can judge this vast people of yours? Solomon looked out, wide-eyed and maybe a little bit intimidated at all he had just been given, and somehow within him he knew that all of this was a responsibility that needed to be carefully managed, because it could have been a gift that he all too easily squandered. It also seemed that Solomon knew that this wisdom, it wasn't something that he could just gain for himself. It had to come from God. And so Solomon asked God for help in managing all that he had been given. Wisdom is not something that we accrue very easily in this world if left to our own devices. We don't do very well with gifts like the one that Solomon was given. We see every day in our culture how the gain of wealth and power leads often not to wisdom, but to rather self-seeking people and greed, and the never quite satiated hunger for more. Solomon knew that wisdom is not like learning a few good, practical investment practices. We can't get wisdom for ourselves. Not the kind we need when managing gifts this big. Wisdom is a gift from God. It comes from a lifetime of prayer, of taking time out to be reminded that everything we've been given, from the breath in our lungs to the cash in our pockets, comes from the holy source and is an outworking of God's blessing on our lives. Of taking time to learn to trust in God's promises to sustain us, instead of believing in the lie that we can somehow secure our own futures for ourselves. Solomon knew that he couldn't secure his own future. After a lifetime of watching his father David, he knew that if left to his own devices, he would end up making choices that only served himself. And as king, that wasn't something that he or the kingdom could afford. His choices affected the lives of the people around him. Now, those of us sitting in this room, we're not kings and queens, but our actions do matter. Every choice we make with our money communicates something about what we value and what we don't. Whose needs get met and whose don't. What lives are treated fairly and which lives are abused or neglected. This conversation today and over the next 3 weeks shouldn't leave you feeling singled out. It's not a condemnation of any of us. None of these messages are an attempt to convict a few hearts in the room. It's an attempt to convict us all. Because we all have to make these choices. We all have to learn to become good stewards because we all affect the lives around us. And I don't know about you, but I desperately need a wisdom that only God can give when making these choices. As I was contemplating Solomon's choice to ask God for wisdom, I couldn't help but think about where Solomon learned such faithfulness. After all, it takes a certain amount of wisdom to even know to ask for wisdom. Solomon had a lifetime of learning from his father David, and David certainly made mistakes, but he always found a way to return to God repentant and to remain faithful as a leader to God's people. Solomon was able to witness firsthand the wisdom of a generation that went before him, and he learned from it. This seems important to me as I think this week about how this passage informs the life of our congregation together. Because there are people sitting in our midst who are currently working to become better stewards of their finances, not to mention other areas of life. There are families who are desperately learning to balance all of the many things that life throws at them on a daily basis. And there are young people who are desperately learning to become wise in their daily living. One is preaching at you right now. As we seek to become better disciples of Jesus Christ in our own lives, in our worship, in our jobs, in our families, with our finances, and as we reach out into this world to invite people to experience the love of God here at Hopewell, I would invite us all to be praying for wisdom. And for you folks who have been praying for wisdom for a long time, who have become pretty well versed in the art of wisdom, you should know that you have a big role to play in the next season of our life here as a congregation. It is your job to wrap your arms around others in this space who may still be trying to figure out some of the things that God has helped you figure out in this life. You are our models. You are our teachers, our mentors. We need your guidance and your grace as we move forward into this exciting new season of life. We're going to need you to pray deeply for wisdom and help us exercise godly wisdom as we make decisions for ourselves and our families and our future. You may have lived many, many years of life, but your job at this church is not over. It may be the most essential. So let us all be brave as we enter these next few weeks of conversation. Let us take a cue from Solomon this month and seek wisdom as we talk about the resources God has given us, and pray that God would help us to see how best we might use them for the glory of the coming